Hi, welcome everybody. On behalf of Polar Knowledge Canada and Neole, I'd like to welcome you to the Environmental Change webinar. We're so pleased to make this webinar available in 3 languages, Inuktitut, French, and English. We're just going to put the slide up again for interpretation. Lena, if you can, thank you so much. There's a few new people who have joined, and the slide will show you the instructions about where the interpretation button is on your Zoom toolbar and how to select the language that you wish to listen in. So what you do is you click on that little globe icon at the bottom of your Zoom screen. You select the language channel, for example, English, that you wish to listen to. And then if you want to mute the original audio so that you're just hearing your language, click on mute original audio. A note for those people who would prefer to listen in English, you can actually select the English channel, and then no matter which language is being spoken, you'll hear in English. The interpretation instructions are also in chat. I also ask our panelists today to speak slowly and clearly for the interpreters. And I realize I just blew through that introduction at top speed, so I will also try to slow down. Today's webinar is one of a series of webinars that Polar is launching this month, the Knowledge Sharing Webinar Series. I invite you to visit our website for more information on the other webinars scheduled in the month of March and for future webinars. And that link to Polar's website is in chat. You can also like the Polar Knowledge Canada Facebook page, and there you'll also find announcements about future webinars. Today's webinar highlights key points of a report on environmental change that will be published as part of Polar's Akaliat. That will be available on Polar's website later in the spring. Be sure to check the website and also Polar's Facebook page to watch for the announcement. Now, I would like to thank all those who have joined us today for this session. And I would also like to take time to acknowledge that there are people here in this session who are joining us from across the North and Canada. We acknowledge the valuable contributions Indigenous peoples have made and continue to make, both with respect to sharing your lands, resources, skills, and knowledge. We further acknowledge a past that has done great harm and that much needs to be done to bring about true reconciliation. We appreciate we have an obligation to learn, to listen, to be inclusive and respectful in all our engagements. Today, we are very grateful for being able to have this knowledge sharing and exchange to help make our work be more inclusive and better as a result of incorporating Indigenous knowledge. I now invite Elder Timothy to open our meeting with opening remarks and a prayer. Please, Elder Timothy.
Hey, okay. Hey,
Yes, I'm going to say a prayer before we begin our meeting. Dear Lord, I pray to you. I'm humbled before you. I pray that we're going to have a good meeting this afternoon, because we are unable to do anything without your help. I seek to you, Lord, for guidance. And I know there are many challenges and many things that we have to deal with and confront on a daily basis. And I know many people travel through their work, those that are out from their communities or their cities for health reasons. I pray for them. Also, I pray for those invalids that cannot get out of their homes, and for whatever reason that they're unable to leave their homes. I pray for their safety, and I pray that wherever they're from, whatever community or city they're from, that you will protect them. I know that we're unable, as we are humbled before you, that we cannot do anything on our own. I know that we cannot just say, we cannot be unable to do it. In Jesus' name, amen.
Can you hear me? Hello? Hello.
Thank you very much, Timothy. And now I'd like to ask Melissa Bolster to give a few opening remarks. Melissa is Acting Director of Knowledge Management and Engagement at Polar Knowledge Canada. Melissa, hi.
Hi, I'm so pleased to be here today. So Polar is a very small organization headquartered in Canada's north in Cambridge Bay. And I just want to share how grateful I am to have the opportunity to learn from the panelists that we have today, community members and leaders and Northerners who are so graciously here with us today to share their knowledge of these key issues. Yesterday's webinar was on caribou and caribou abundance, and it was, I think, a really good example of the objective that we are trying to achieve with this series of webinars, which is to enhance some of the information and insights that were developed as part of these collaborative assessment reports that'll be published on our website later this spring, and to provide some more perspectives and create a little bit of more information. What stood out the most for me yesterday, and I think will probably continue to be seen in the webinars as we move forward in the coming weeks, was the sort of holistic connection between the person, the community members, the individuals, and their environment and the caribou. It really stood out to me how the health of the caribou herds, the availability of hunting, how those things are shared within the community is always a conversation about community wellness. And I'm looking forward to learning more and hearing the perspectives of the panelists today and what they have to share. You know, it's just so pleased to be a part of this. So thank you so much for the opportunity to learn today, and I'll turn it back over to you, Laura.
Thank you very much, Melissa, for providing us with some background about today's webinar and about the report that will be published as part of Polar's Acaliat. And you also spoke about the collaborative assessment and the purpose. The report brings together scientific and Indigenous knowledge to answer questions raised about the changing climate and the impact on the environment. And the purpose of the report is to, and of today's webinar, is to share this knowledge and research in a format that's accessible to more people. The questions that formulated the basis of the report are community-based, and they were the outcome of a regional planning and knowledge sharing workshop that took place in March 2020 at the Canadian High Arctic Research Station in Nunavut. Because Inuit depend on the land and the ice for food and to maintain their culture, the workshop participants wanted a better understanding of climate change so that communities can develop ways to adapt. So as the environmental change report nears publication, and in the spirit of knowledge sharing in which the report was created, it's only fitting that we revisit the original questions with the Indigenous knowledge holders, community members, and authors who contributed to the knowledge contained in the report, and who are interested in bridging the gaps in knowledge and emerging opportunities presented in the report. We all know that questions create more questions, of course. And for you listening, for those of you who are listening in today, we invite you to type your questions in the question and answer, the Q&A space, which you'll find on your Zoom toolbar. And the slide here shows you what the icon looks like. And if you just click on that, you'll see a box pop up where you can type your questions. While we prefer that you use the Q&A function to ask questions because it helps us keep track of which questions have been asked and which have been answered, it's okay if you type your questions into the Zoom chat. We're tracking the chat for questions as well. And we'll try to make sure that all the questions are answered, if not today, then at a later date on the Polar website. Now, before we start, I'd like to invite our panel members and those of you in the audience to do two things. First, I invite you to be comfortable with silence. Today's webinar is really more of a discussion than a presentation, although you will see some slides which just help to illustrate some of the points in the report. But gaps in conversation will happen as people just sort of stop to formulate their thoughts and their responses. And as sometimes we do also deal with a couple of technical issues. So yes, just try and be comfortable with the silence because it will happen. Second, I invite you to be curious. Please make use of the Q&A function. Ask your questions. Don't be shy. Okay. Let's get to know our panelists today. If everyone could just turn their cameras on, please, so we could see you, that would be great. I have Johnny up in the top left of my screen, so I'm just going to start there and work my way across. Johnny, would you like to introduce yourself and let us know where you are joining from?
Yes, Vlami. I'm Johnny Lenny from Inuvik, Northwest Territories, in Inuvialuit Settlement Region. Time up.
Thank you, Johnny. Laurent, you are up next.
Hi, I'm Lauren. They call me Loga here in town. I'm from Nauyat, Nunavut, and I'm a hunter and a fisherman both times. Thank you.
Thank you, Laurent. And we next up on my screen, we have Simata and Kayla and Ningiole. And could you please just unmute yourselves and introduce yourselves? Oh, you're muted.
Sorry,
Thanks.
someone muted. Yeah. Yeah. My name is Ningula Khilikti. I'm from Kimmerut, Nunavut.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Kayla Nutagasundak. I'm also from Kimmerut, Nunavut.
Thank you, Kayla. Welcome.
Hi, Stemata yung Kimmerut me sama teona.
Hi, I'm Sain Matak and from Kimmerut. And
Welcome.
Kayla Nutakasugnik and Ningiula Khilakti.
Welcome, everybody. Timothy, we've already heard from you, but would you mind introducing yourself?
Sometimes it's kind of hard to.
My name is Timothy. I'm a member of the Hunters and Trappers. I also work at the Arctic College. I do not understand any English at all. That's all I could tell you. And so I really rely on the interpreter. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Timothy. And yes, I would actually like to say a special thanks to Lisa and also to our French interpreters here today for the vital service that you're providing and connecting us. Thank you. Donald, please, would you mind introducing yourself?
Hi, I'm Donald McLennan. I'm the Chief Scientist at the Arctic Research Foundation. And I was formerly at the Canadian High Arctic Research Station in Cambridge Bay when the original meeting occurred. So, and with my fellow authors, we put together the report that is the basis of this presentation today. Look forward to talking to you.
Thank you, Donald, and welcome everybody. Okay, so as I mentioned before, We are going to be working our way through 3 or 4 questions that the environmental change report was based on. And the first question, though, just to start us off, I'm curious. I'd like to invite our Indigenous knowledge holders to tell us a little bit about what changes to the weather you've noticed. Anybody who would like to speak? Hi, Lauren.
Hi, weather-wise, we are, well, this year, 2021, 22, in the last summer, we had unusually a lot of rainfall and wind. Usually, mostly a little bit of rain, calm, mostly all summer. But the summer of 2021 it was windy, rain and rain. And then this winter, now we have windy weather, some storms, not as much as before, 1990s, but windy. So that's about it for now.
Okay, thank you. Johnny, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I'll take a couple of minutes if you don't mind.
Sure.
We notice quite a bit with changes in weather. They say it's climate change and other things happening, but a lot of it, like talking to elders from the past, that things like these happened before. There's warming trends, but whether it's related to climate change, I'm not the one to definitely specify that anyway. But for fall, in the fall, it's really noticeable on the sea ice in my time period. Like, I'm just over 60 years old, and I've been out in the ice a few times. And like a few years ago, well, maybe about 10 years ago now, a lot of the people, hunters from the coast, especially Tuktoyaktuk, commented on that we had a really late freeze up in the Beaufort. We're on the eastern Beaufort, and so there was lots of open water, but she was frozen from the shore ice, 40 miles out. But once you get further down the coast from Bailey Island area, like, she was open water, and they noticed a lot of bears, like on the ice close. Normally that's close to shore, and a lot of bears, polar bears, and they actually got, it was pretty good for them because they got an early harvest for their subsistence needs, and but again, that's just wanted to comment on that. And for around Inuvik, you got to understand that Inuvik, it's a established community, like it was established by the government, and we're 100 miles inland. And most communities are, traditional communities are established close to good hunting areas, good fishing areas. But for our fall fishing, we have to travel on the ice, and we really like to, part of our traditional food is shuvalik. If you don't understand, it's egg fish, and it's really a delicacy. And we usually able to go fishing early go out on the ice early, but it's been delayed because it's just the ice is freezing up too late, right? Like, we have to have all the fishing done by November 1st. I know I'm taking a bit of time, but just thought I'd share that with you. And even in the falls, like big we used to usually have big snowfalls in October, November. Now it's coming later. And whether it's related to the sea ice freezing up later, or I'm not sure. But as far as spring, nothing has changed much for us, because it just gets so cold and the ice still gets 6-7 feet thick here. And she just takes its time once she starts warming up. Like, for example, this morning it's -30 here, or 26 anyway. But Taima.
Thank you, Johnny. Kayla. In Simata, what changes have you noticed in the weather? Oh, you're muted. Thank you.
Saya mataw nga. Udyo ko sa madaka siku siya hatta ko ni jet si malikto tay mga ni 1982 minutilaw sa magata kimero mo. Mani kimero mi utawlok tiluta asid jiralak si magyanga udyo ka si madaka. Kasi nako nga nako may.
Thank you.
Sorry,
And-
my mute was on. She was just saying that when they moved into Kimirot in the 80s, that she noticed that the ice conditions have changed very dramatically since around the time before she was into it. She moved into the settlement, and then the ice conditions changed more rapidly, where it doesn't ice over as quickly now. It takes a longer time to actually freeze ice. That was her comment.
Okay, thank you. Kayla, sorry, we actually just what's called spotlit you, so we could see you a little bit bigger on our screens. Sorry, I know it's surprised when you just sort of pop up like that, but thank you. I was like, oh, there I am. Kayla, did you have anything to add? Which about changes you've seen in the weather?
Yes, thank you. I don't recall a lot, but I came here to Kimirot in 2002. I've also noticed the weather has changed, and I do notice that, yeah, I agree with what was mentioned, that the ice used to form more quickly in the older days, but I think it's late now, and looking at around December, where it can finally start to freeze over. And for me, that's what I personally experienced. And in the summertime, during the summer months, what I've experienced and seen, I'm not too sure what else to add, but those are the seasons that I've seen the changes all in there.
Thank you. And Nigele, how about yourself? What changes have you noticed in the weather?
Yeah, I'll make it short.
Mhm.
Over the years, I've heard some elders about the climate. A lot of it I'm hearing is ice forming. It's very late. Also, the rain. We have rain and the wind. We had a lot of rain this year. Like, I find it changes every year. It changes every year, the weather.
Mhm.
We don't.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Oh, that's a brief one.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
So Donald, I'm going to call on you now. Do you find any of these weather changes surprising? Anything that you heard that really stood out for you?
Well, I've certainly heard people talking about the later fall freeze up. That's a really, and of course, the sea ice is the highway. That's how people get around in the winter. It's extremely important for hunting, for communicating between communities. So the late fall freeze up is probably one of the main, but what surprises me is the variability from east to west across Nunangat in how much things have increased. So I think one of the questions we were asked is, why is it warming so fast? Maybe I could have the first slide. I made a few slides just to kind of show things here. It needs to go in presentation there. There we go. Oop, almost getting closer. So here's the Arctic Ocean, and I guess you can't see my cursor, but you can imagine where Tuktoyaktuk is there, where Johnny's calling in from, just at the kind of in the middle, in the bottom there. We were asked this question. Now, the what looks like clouds there is actually sea ice, as seen from a satellite. And the orange line around that is where the sea ice used to be at its minimum extent in September up to around 1980. And this is where the sea ice is now in this particular picture, 2016, but the same today in 2020, probably even less sea ice at the end of the season. So what's interesting here, maybe hit the button there. The sun and the way the sun's rays hit the ice. Next, hit it again. One more. Yeah, so you can imagine what the sun's rays come down and they hit this white surface, and the heat in the sun is reflected off the ice surface. So that heat is not added to the atmosphere. It's re-radiated back into space. So what happens when you don't have sea ice? Again, please. Then that heat, that sun's ray hits the water, the dark water, and that heat is absorbed by the water. And so instead of being re-radiated back into space and lost, that heat is kept in the environment. It warms the ocean, and then in turn, it warms the land around the ocean. So this Arctic amplification that we've been seeing, next one, is the result of one of the main reasons, and I won't tell you that we think this is all that's happening. We think there's a lot of other things happening as well, but this is the key one, is this loss of sea ice, and it's what we call a positive feedback, because then the less sea ice, the more heating, the warmer the atmosphere, the more sea ice is melted, the more the ocean is warm. And this is why it takes so long in the fall in the way we're understanding things, because in order to freeze all of that ice again, you have to drive all of that heat out of the water from the sun before it can start to freeze. So it's taking about a month longer for the sea ice to, or for the sun to warm up the water and for the sea ice to start forming again. So that's in kind of a nutshell what we think is happening, and of course the observations we're hearing from the communities, reflect this kind of understanding. Next slide. So what is interesting, I'll direct you to that, the orange looking flat projection of the Earth there on the left. And you'll see the orange, and if you look at the scale below, all of the orange and red colors mean things have increased in heat, and any white means no change, and blue means it's gotten cooler. And this is since 1971. So most of Asia and North America has gone up between 0.5 and 1. But look at those red colors across the Arctic. That's 2 to 4 degrees Celsius increase in temperature across the Arctic. And this is the result of the Arctic amplification that I was just talking about in the previous slide. Now, I said what's interesting to me is that all of the communities don't experience this the same way. You see a nice solid red color there, but of course, as usual, it's much more complicated than that. Next, push the button again, please. Here is a graph of all of the communities in Nunangat, and you'll probably see your community in the list there. And they're grouped by the 4 land claim areas from Nunavut in Labrador, Nunavik in northern Quebec, Nunavut, where many of our observers today are coming from, and Inuvialuit, where Johnny is. And so there, the communities make up the rows, and across the bottom, those are the months of the year, okay? And on the far right is the average for the whole year. And red colors mean it's getting warmer. So overall, you can see that if you look at the temperatures from each of these communities and average it over the whole year, that they're generally getting warmer by maybe 1 degree. But some are getting, for example, in November, in the Inuvialuit settlement region and in Nunavik and in parts of Nunavut, in Kimirut and Iqaluit, November and December are very warm. And that's because, once again, of this sea ice effect, of this heat being trapped in the ocean, and it takes a while for that heat to be driven out so things can freeze up again. So that's kind of a picture of how things are happening across the Arctic and how it varies from community to community and from season to season. The next slide. We also talk in the report about the impacts on vegetation, and we can use satellite imagery to take pictures of the Earth in 1982, say, the picture on the left, and then again in 2019. And we can compare those 2 images, and we can understand from that how the vegetation is growing more rapidly. So the image on the left, and this figure is from the report, the figure on the left shows the whole circumpolar north. So that's us looking down on the planet from above, from due north. And you can see that there's much green, especially on the Alaska coastal plain over into the Yukon coastal plain. Lots of Nunavut is green. There are some brown, which is another issue. And over in Russia as well, things are quite green. And that's the result of the warming and the vegetation responding to the warming. Now, the picture on the right is some work we've done in the Kitikmeot when I was working at the Canadian High Arctic Research Station in Cambridge Bay. And that shows the greening on a much more local scale. And you can see that it's not even. There's enhanced greening around Bathurst Inlet and around Kuluktuk. And we think this is because the sea ice is leaving sooner in Bathurst Inlet, and the sea ice is leaving sooner around Kuguruk in that end of Coronation Gulf. And also Great Bear Lake behind, we know, is losing ice sooner. And so, as I was saying, the heat that provides into the atmosphere warms the local vegetation and makes it grow even faster. So I think that's what I have for now. That's those. Any questions there? I would love to. I'd love to take them. But I think it agrees quite closely with the observations from the other panelists we've seen today.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Thank you, Donald. Lauren, I wondered if you have any questions or thoughts for Donald on what Donald just showed us.
No, not really. No. What? No, not really. Sorry.
Okay, that's fine.
So Laura, I would ask you, was that reasonably clear? You understood what I was trying to get across?
Yes, and more,
Well,
I see Kayla nodding, so yes, I guess
Oh,
so.
Laura, Laura was going to answer there.
Oh, Lord, okay, yeah.
yeah, well, I'm not very good at maps, and whatnot on the map area and what the far places for me. I'm not very good at that. I only see what I see in near the settlement here. So I'm not very good at long range. Sorry.
No problem, Laura. I'm just trying to, become a better communicator. So I was just asking. Thank you.
Yeah. Yep. Thank you.
Do any of our panelists have a question for Donald about what he just showed us? I do have a couple of questions from the audience. So one of them is, what factors affected the cooling in certain southern waters?
I'm going to tell you that, on a case-by-case basis, I really can't provide a clear answer to that. The variability is amazing. And like I said, why isn't it just the same all the way across? Is a very good question. I know that, for example, the Western Arctic and the Eastern Arctic have warmed more than the like the Kitikmeot area. And we think that is because the effect of the Arctic Ocean and its changes is actually affecting global weather. So it's affecting the jet streams, these high elevation streams that really determine the weather and the way the fronts move around the atmosphere from west to east. And there seems to be something happening where we get much more wobble, where they're going much farther north and much farther south. So you're getting these cold spells in central Canada, in the United States. You're getting droughts in California. And this expresses itself up into Alaska, into the Inuvik area, and then it dips again. And then places like Nunavik and Iqaluit receive this warming air. So it isn't strictly Arctic amplification, but it's an indirect effect of the Arctic amplification and the sea ice effect affecting these jet stream and then causing unequal warming in different parts of the Arctic. That's my best guess at this time, but it is just that. It's just me speculating about it.
Okay, and we had a question about Arctic browning. Is that
Yeah, browning is quite interesting. Browning means from the period of the first satellite image, say in the early 80s, to the last satellite image in that comparison, which might be, 2015 or 16, there's actually less productivity. We call that browning. And we know it happens, for example, in the boreal forest because there's so much forest fire. So you have you got warming temperatures, you have more fires, more severe fires. So the actual productivity of the vegetation, which was nice, healthy old forest, is now much younger forest and is not as productive. So you get a decrease in productivity. But a lot of that browning is in the high Arctic. And we think that maybe the technique of using satellites breaks down because there's so much bare ground up there. There's very sparse vegetation when you get up to Ellefringness Island, and the north end of Ellesmere. Vegetation is so sparse that this satellite technique doesn't work very well. So once again, scientists are continuing to work on these issues. There's scientists that do nothing else but this kind of satellite investigation, and maybe in 3 or 4 years I'll have a better answer for you to understand what's happening with browning in the high Arctic.
So we're going to talk about opportunities for future research shortly, but one of our audience members put a great question in chat, which is a good segue to our next question about the impacts of weather changes to the north. And that question is, do the hunters have an idea of what more shrubs on the land would mean to animals like caribou, for instance? So if there's more shrubs on the land, what does that mean to animals like caribou? Yeah, Lauren.
I don't know. I personally know. If there's more, I just lived, what, 6 years now, nothing much changed.
Mm.
I mean, what I noticed, well, near in town though, there's more grass for sure. When I was a small kid, there was more gravel. Right now there's grass growing where there used to be gravel. That's one of the changes I noticed. But I don't know if it has anything to do with animals. I don't know about what affects the animals. We don't have any tall shrubs, like just a little bit of grass in the Arctic Circle here. So I don't know.
Johnny, what are your observations, and what other kind of impacts do you think, if you don't, about weather changes, do you see?
Oh, sorry, hit the wrong button. I'm just gonna ask a question for Donald or to comment on. I looked at a recent report. It's kind of early now, but for the 2021-22 year, like for the ice forming, they said it increased for this year. I know it's early, but I don't know, maybe you can comment on that. But as far as like, yeah, shrubs growing earlier, definitely they're like it is like growing, always been moving northward, the tree line, like we travel back and forth between the coast and the tree line. And yeah, it's in some places it's harder to travel like in the tree line because of the shrubs, but it's usually on burns what they have shrubs anyway. But as far as coming further north, like Lawrence said, it hasn't been much change in some of the trails we've been on, like that we travel over constantly. Maybe in the creeks and that, where the shelter areas, yeah, definitely. Looks like the willows are getting bigger and a little higher, but wherever there's shelter, but haven't seen much change, but definitely inside the tree line, we have seen some. Thank you.
Thank you. Donald, you have a summary, a slide showing a summary of what are the major impacts of weather changes to the north.
Sure.
Can you share that?
I just wanted to respond to the shrub in that people haven't seen a lot. Most of the change in shrub is in the very southern part of the Arctic, just from the tree line, like Johnny was saying, up into the lower Arctic. We call it Zone E, the low shrub tundra, we call it. And that's where most of the change has been to date. There's been very little change in, around Iqaluit, there's people here from Kimmerout. There's been very little change there so far. So their observations are bang on in that sense. And I can take the first slide, the next slide. These graphics are from the report, and And there's kind of two components to this. A warming Arctic is a changing Arctic. One is measuring change, and how do we measure change? And of course, this won't be news to a lot of you that, we use ships that come through, some coastal ships and and icebreakers from Canadian Coast Guard, and people do research from that to understand changes in the ocean. Meteorological Service of Canada, at every airport, there's a weather station. This is from Ulahoktok, this particular picture, the next one down. The other is where we study vegetation in what we call these greenhouse chambers, where that little greenhouse effect of these open chambers increases the temperature in there about 2 degrees centigrade, which is about the same as the change that's happening in temperature. So we use that to simulate and understand what 2 degrees of centigrade change might mean for Arctic vegetation. And of course, we use community-based monitoring, and we want to talk a lot about community-based monitoring before we're done here today. But I went out with the Rangers many years ago, and they have a program called Canadian Rangers Ocean Watch, CROW, that's organized with DFO and the Rangers in Kitikmeot, and they go out and drill holes in the ice and take measurements through the ice. That's what Amy is doing here. She's not fishing. She dropped down an instrument to look at water chemistry and that. So there's many, many ways that we measure change. And on the basis of this, next button there, on the basis of this, we come up with all sorts of things that are happening on the land in terms of rising temperatures. So in the middle, you have the thermometer with the arrow indicating that the temperature is going up. I mentioned to the right, there's more sea ice loss, and that has that positive feedback. But a shorter snow season also does the same thing. If there's no snow on the ground, the sun's rays are not, and the heat is re-radiated back into space. But if that is bare ground, then that heat is absorbed. So it has exactly the same effect as the sea ice in warming things. We heard about more rain, and the predictions from the models are for more rain for a wetter Arctic. This can mean rain on snow events, which I'm sure some of you are familiar with. That is where you have a snow and then you get rain and then you get freezing. And it's very hard for caribou and muskox to dig through that ice layer and feed themselves. So, and this has caused some pretty significant diebacks over the years in caribou, especially Prairie caribou. So that's something that's quite important. We know that the warming is causing the permafrost to be warmer. And where you have mountain slopes, if you look on the left side of our diagram there, those slopes are held in place by the frozen ground. And as the warming temperatures and that ground freezes, we're getting big landslides. I've seen these, especially on Banks Island, wherever you have fine sediments and slopes. They're very, very abundant now on Banks Island. We've seen them in the Peel River, seen them in the Eastern Arctic as well. So this flows into the rivers. In some cases, it can even dam the river, fills the river with mud for quite a few years, because the water runs off these open scars and muddies the river, makes it bad for fish, and it goes out into the ocean, delivering sediment into the ocean. We know from changes in the rainfall that breakup is happening sooner, and it's not as peak. So people in Kuluktuk talk about breakup used to be a big event that was noisy. You could hear it in your bed. The ice would be banging against the ice chunks, and it was really loud. Now it starts sooner and it's not as big a peak. So that's pretty important. But overall, this fresh water goes into the ocean, and what happens there is it doesn't mix very well. It will stay on top, and that reduces the amount of current that's coming up from deeper water, and that's what feeds the microscopic animals. The phytoplankton become the food chain for seals, for polar bears, for char. So we are concerned about that as well. So a lot of changes are occurring on the land, and unfortunately, until we stop putting carbon into the atmosphere, I'm sorry, but we can expect that these will accelerate and will become more pronounced. Something to keep in mind, I think, is that there's huge year-to-year variability in whether it's snow or sea ice. But what we look at is the long-term trend that goes through those. And although it's very hard for someone like me to actually see it, oh, it's colder this year, it's warmer this year, it's colder this year. If you look over like a 30-year period, you will see an uptick in the trend of all of these things. So I could leave it there and take whatever questions people may have.
Thank you, Donald. Yes, please, Lauren.
Go ahead. I can add something after. Thank you.
Oh, no, that's okay, please. And then we have actually a question for you too, also from the audience about impacts. So
Okay.
go ahead. Yep.
I'll try to make it quick here. Thank you. Well, it looks like we're going towards ice-free, warmer period in so many years, probably. I don't know when, but sooner, I guess, than later. So it's just, I think it's just a story, but well, let me explain first about what I learned up to now. We had ice-free periods in the world up at the north, and glaciers, ice age and whatnot. Aren't we just going towards another ice-free period some in the future? Like we had glaciers, trees up north, and also from what I heard from my dad before when I was a kid, he said, I remember he said, if there is no winter, people are going to go hungry, and they had ice-free periods like no winter up north, and people became hungry. Now, on the other hand, he said, when there's no summer, there will be a lot of seals because the sea ice didn't melt, and people will get a lot of seals during that time. So I guess it's a cycle. Looks like we're going towards the ice-free warmer period sometime in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. Maybe Laura, I could just respond to Laurent.
Please do.
You're absolutely correct that many things, tree line used to go right to the Tuktoyaktuk Peninsula. There have been much warmer periods in the past, and I think because of the oral traditions of the Inuit people passing knowledge down through the generations, that is in their knowledge and understanding of how things have changed. There's something different, though, about this change, and that is that it's linked directly to the amount of carbon dioxide that essentially people in the South are putting into the atmosphere. We see that very clearly. And what's different is the rate of change. So where you might have a curve like this, which is the natural cycle, we've got a curve that's like this. It's very, very steep. And so I think that's the difference, and it's driven, we're 100% sure, well, scientists are never 100% sure, so we're 99% sure that this is driven by what people are putting into the atmosphere in terms of carbon dioxide. And it's a new pattern on the cyclic patterns that Inuit people have been seeing for many, many years.
Lauren, a question from the audience, that you mentioned that there's a lot more wind. And has this changed the way you go out on the land, or?
Wind wise, yes, of course. we do a lot of boating in Repulse Bay, seal hunting, walrus, wells, to go somewhere for a caribou hunt. So it takes out, you know, we have to wait for nicer weather, calm weather to go somewhere. It's really rough when it's windy. And you know, we get hungry too for country food. So that's it.
Thank you. So we've heard a lot about the impact of the changing weather on sea ice and the permafrost and rain and snow and fires and the water. When you think of all these changes, I'd like to invite Timothy or Samata, Kayla, to comment on what the impact is of weather changes and of all of these changes on northern communities and traditional activities.
Ay, tuhayaw yulak ni, tuhalak ni Timothy, iyo. Okay, tana apakot isumagit tayo ko yakut.
I thought about it in the summertime, particularly back where we were on our camp. There's some of the changes that I've noticed. When I looked at the lakes, the rivers, and some of the changes that I've noticed due to the warmer temperatures. And I've noticed that the lakes and rivers are a lot warmer. I've always wondered why that was the case, but I do realize why, but it was just a moment to wonder, but I do understand the process. However, when we drink water from our lakes, we know that they're shiny lakes, that clear and pristine. I'm wondering from the researchers, just wondering the safety of our water and the quality of our water, will that be affected in the long term? And if that's going to be researched, thank you.
Will I respond, Laura?
Yes, please. Mhm.
Water quality, whenever I talk with people across all of Nunangat, they are so clear that water quality is so important. And there are changes in water quality. I mentioned permafrost and the banks of rivers are collapsing, putting more mud into the water. One other rather disturbing thing we really need to keep an eye on is the fact that there may be enhanced levels of mercury in the permafrost that's frozen at the bottom of soil horizons are frozen in these slumping areas. And as we know, mercury has the potential to travel through the food chain and occupy the food that we eat, especially fish and caribou and seals. It can, what we call, bioaccumulate. So yes, there are really important concerns around water quality, and there are scientists other than myself who are working on these issues.
Thank you. Just to wrap up the section on the impacts of weather on northern communities and traditional activity, I wondered if Ningole, Samata, Kayla, if you had any thoughts.
Ubang na. Oh, tusok sa ubang. Yeah, sorry, I'm charging my phone. So,
Okay.
hi, ubang na. Say mo ta.
Hello, it's me, Saimata. During the winter, we noticed that the snowfall was late. And then the snowfall was not as frequent. And then once the snow fell, it just seemed to be dropping in numbers. So it was a large amount of snow that fell. And so it just seems to come all in one swoop, whereas it would normally had fallen over a period of time, but now it doesn't do that. It just seems to fall all at once. Also, in terms of our flora and fauna, I've been noticing that they seem to grow quicker and earlier in the season. And also, it depends on which plants. Some plants will grow while the other ones don't grow. So they seem to be taking turns in growing. And that's what I've noticed with that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ilan?
Ay, naglig ka na anak ko yun. Timothy?
I have another comment.
Yes, please.
And yes,
Yes.
some of the things I've noticed, and particularly in the month of when we look at the stars, and we notice the astronomy and the stars and what area they're on, and we can observe our changes, our season when we look at the different months. For now, for example, this month, when we look at the moon, it seems to be closer to our Earth in the summertime. So it seems to be a lot nearer to our Earth, to our areas. That's what I noticed in the summertime, that our moon seems to be a lot closer. So it's almost like the position of our Earth has shifted, where the moon is a lot closer. So that's what I wanted to mention, that I've observed that. Thank you.
Thank you. Donald, any thoughts on Timothy's comments? Oh, there you are. Great.
You're talking to me? I had my hand raised. No, I hit it by
Yes.
accident. Sorry.
Oh, okay. Well, you know what? I'm going to pick on you anyway. So now here you are. So the next, the last area that we're going to talk about is the research priorities, research and monitoring. So Donald spoke briefly earlier on about some of the research techniques and the monitoring that's going on. And I'm going to ask Donald in a minute just to talk about some of the priorities that the authors of the environmental change report identified. But do you have any thoughts on where the priorities should lie for research into the impact of climate change on the environment in the North?
Definitely. I don't know if it'd be a priority for everybody, but every region, but definitely along the tree line, between the tundra and the tree line. It's I think a lot of focus should be on the precipitation, the snowfall, because it does have a lot of effect on the different animals and the traveling through the area. And historically, like, we're able to travel there earlier, but because of the late falls, it prevents us to go in there. And then it comes in, freezes up later, and we start traveling in there. Then we get big, heavy snowfalls. And like I said yesterday, for example, like in December this year, we had twice as much snow as we normally get in I just looked at the records for the past 5 years. And just another question for Donald again. He doesn't have to answer it now, but there's been a lot of historical research on ice in regards to development, like the companies working for the oil industry in the 70s and early 80s. They done a lot of testing on ice, similar to the picture you showed. They drilled. I actually worked as a technician with on the icebreaker, the John A. McDonald, for 3 years, and
Wow.
we done same thing, drilled a hole in the ice and done testing of the strength of the ice, and that was in April and May, and just mainly they were designing the icebreakers to work in the Canadian Beaufort back then in the 70s and 80s. And do you look at that data? And I'm sure there's lots of it available because they designed icebreakers because of it, and they can definitely use that data to compare with your existing data you're doing now. Taima.
Yeah, thanks, Johnny. It's a really good question, and it actually brings up some issues with historical data, old data, and new data. I'm not an ice scientist, so there's so many different aspects. I'm actually a tundra scientist. I study the tundra and plants and tree line and all of that sort of thing. I really hope that people are using that data. I know they go back in their archives to show trends. So for example, the trends you see in sea ice, that's because people were collecting data back in the 70s and the 60s, and then it's gone forward. But oftentimes I will tell you where it's for industrial purposes, sometimes those data are not included in the kind of academic science data. We have what's called stovepipes. And sometimes those stovepipes don't talk to each other very well. I'm not saying that's the case for this ice strength data you were doing on Sir John McDonald, but that is a problem in science with our data, that if it comes from a slightly different source, then sometimes those data are not made available. So that's really interesting that you were doing that work in the 70s.
Donald, I'd like to ask you just to speak to some of the research priorities that the authors of the Environmental Change Report identified. Oh, you're muted.
Sorry about that. Yeah, well, Johnny just brought up one of them, and that's snow cover. Snow is so important, as Johnny was just saying, and everybody, all the hunters here who travel on the land, snow is so important. It's changing. Snow is changing, and unfortunately, snow is one of the most. It's relatively easy to predict changes in temperature. It's very difficult to predict changes in snow. People talk about, and I think there was another one of our panelists was talking about changes where they're getting more rain, they're getting more wind, they got a big dump of snow instead of snow spread unevenly. And in the Inuvialuit settlement region, they got twice as much as they had last year. Well, that's that's just the unpredictability and the difficulty in dealing with snow. So there are many excellent scientists who are working on snow and trying to predict snow. And I would say that there are any number of Indigenous knowledge holders who have tremendous knowledge of snow and how snow is changing. And I think the way we want to go forward, and we'll cover this at the very end, is to use those two kinds of knowledge to a much better benefit than we have so far. In terms of others, really just the things we've been talking about. Temperature, we don't have enough temperature data. The Arctic is huge. All we have is data from communities, so we need more sort of coverage in between communities. Same with precipitation and snow. Permafrost, once again, actually very few permafrost stations in the north, nowhere near the network that we need. It makes so much sense to put them in communities and have people watching those and taking care of those instruments in communities. We talked about the importance of discharge out of rivers, and I'm just reading here from the table that is in the report. So if you have a copy of the report, or you'll be seeing it soon, you'll be able to see everything we've listed. So the amount of water coming out of the rivers, the chemical composition of the water, which is so important for the health of the river and for the ocean that it flows into, what's happening to our lakes in the winter in terms of ice and snow cover, and how that impacts everything. The warming ocean is something that people have mentioned. That's something else that we really need to work on. And the chemistry of the ocean is changing. One important thing to remember is that the ocean has absorbed almost a third of the carbon since 1970. Close to a third of that carbon has been absorbed by the ocean. And that carbon otherwise would be in the atmosphere, and it would be a lot warmer and more drastic than it is right now. And people wonder how much longer the ocean can continue to absorb the carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. And the other part of it is that when carbon dioxide goes into the ocean, it forms an acid and makes the water more acid, and it makes it unsuitable for some of the small organisms that contribute to the food chain for char and seals. And so very, very important changes that are happening there. And sea ice. We need to do more on sea ice. There's a tremendous amount of work happening on sea ice, but we need it more locally around communities so people can use it to plan their travel and know where the leads are and know when it's opening and when it's closing on a real-time basis. So those are some of the things we have listed in our table, and I encourage you to go to the report and have a look at it.
Thank you, Donald. And I hope people got a chance just to read about some of the future directions for research that are also in the report. So the report that Donald is referring to will be published as part of the Acaliat report being published in the spring. There was a lovely comment about the infographics that Donald shared, and that infographic, and in fact, I think all of the graphics that you presented today are in the report as a way of innovative ways to share the knowledge. Unfortunately, we weren't able to address all the questions that were placed in chat today. I thank you very much for all of your questions and your comments. Please watch for the report to come out later on in the spring. And if you do have questions about the impact of climate change on Arctic char and other fish populations, and also on whales, I invite you to join our webinars that continue on in March. In fact, the next one is about Arctic char, and that's taking place next Tuesday. Yes, Donald.
Just very quickly, what we didn't get to cover is in terms of future direction, we really want to be moving more closely with communities, to work with communities, to make measurements, to benefit from Indigenous knowledge. And that is clearly the direction that all scientists in the North are headed towards right now. So I look forward to that as really a new chapter in science in the North in Canada. Thank you for your attention today.
Thank you, Donald. Timothy, did you have a comment or a question?
Yeah,
Yeah, I had a question. I was thinking about something. I was thinking that it's almost like the focus is going to be too much geared toward the ocean in a way, in terms of the priorities. However, I was thinking that maybe you could include in the research the trout, the seals, and we know that we're landlocked in the Baker Lake area, so any mammals that might be coming into the Hamanuktuaq Lake would be a good thing to research, and not just necessarily the ocean. So I'm thinking that if there could be research on if there might be mercury or any other chemicals that might be coming into our waters, if that could be a priority at some point, if something you could think about. Thank you.
Yeah, she agreed to the closing remark.
Thank you, Timothy. Yes, in fact, I do believe, Timothy, that you are involved in the Arctic char webinar next week. And the mercury in the char and other fish is one of the questions that will be talked about. So thank you. Simata, I wondered if you might give us some closing remarks to end our webinar today.
Mhm.
Ubanga.
Yes.
Mana. At
I'd like to say a closing prayer. I'm going to agree to your request in God's name. I pray to you that we aren't able to do anything on our own. I humble before you, Lord, that I request you that you watch over us in the future and in our future meetings, that we may be benefiting each and every one of us in our daily lives and through our work, that we may be able to achieve things that are necessary for ourselves and our communities and our families. In Jesus' name, amen.
Thank you. Hey, thank you, everybody, for joining us today. I'm sorry, Timothy, did you have a few words?
Oh, Tanya, ikulo lang.
Yes, I guess so. The computer had issues last time with technical problems. So I'm looking forward to that fish one. I did catch up a little bit on what was mentioned in the previous session, and I wanted to comment a few things,
Sure.
but I'll wait till the next session.
Okay. Great, thank you. I look forward to seeing you again. I look forward to seeing everybody again next week. Thank you so much for participating today, and have a wonderful day and a great weekend. Thank you.